I'm excited to be back doing video interviews for the All Things Iceland podcast. And to kick off my first video interview of 2024, I have the lovely Laura Alice Watt, who is an American who grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. She is professor emerita of environmental history and policy at Sonoma State University. And she currently lives in one of the remote areas of the Westfjords. So the Westfjords in Iceland is already remote, but she's gone even more remote than like some of the towns there. And her way of getting to Iceland is different than how many others who come here from the US or places that are non-EU or places that are either in the EU or Schengen area. So she's going to shed some insight on how it was made possible for her to be in Iceland full time on a resident permit and working her way towards a permanent residence. She definitely gives great advice regarding people who want to move to Iceland, but also really just sharing her story. So I hope you enjoy this interview. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you enjoyed about this interview or questions that you might even have for Laura. I will have her Instagram or like ways you can get in contact with her if you want to reach out to her directly. Hi, Laura. Welcome to All Things Iceland. I am so excited to have you on to talk about how you're living and working in Iceland. And so thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet. Thank you. The weather even has cooperated. Instead of having horrible wind and storms, we have sunshine and flowers even.
Yeah. And you have great views of outside of your home of like the mountains and the water.
I live in the countryside, and so it's good views in all directions.
Yes, in a very remote part of Iceland, which we're going to get into because Laura has a fascinating and amazing story. And we're going to start off, though, from the beginning. We need to know where you're from. And for those who might not have caught it, she's from the U.S. I mean, technically, you could be from anywhere, but you just happen to be from the U.S. So if you don't mind sharing where you grew up in the U.S.
Yeah, I spent almost my entire life in the San Francisco Bay Area. So my family moved there when I was 2 years old, and except for then a 2-year stint when I was doing a master's program in North Carolina, all the rest of my life was in the Bay Area, although I moved around in the Bay Area a lot. So my dad was a professor at Stanford. We started off there. I went to UC Berkeley for college and then grad school later. I lived in San Francisco for a while, then I was in Oakland, then I was in the North Bay. So sort of the dumb joke is that I'm tectonic. I've been slowly moving north along the San Andreas Fault until there was just big leap to come here. So
yes, which is amazing to go from somewhere like San Francisco to Iceland, especially one of the most remote areas that you can live in here. And what was your?
Oh, go ahead. Oh no, go ahead.
No, I feel like you had something that was really fun to say.
Oh, it's funny in the summer when the hills are green around here and it gets foggy, so the mountaintops are hidden. It actually looks astonishing like the Northern California coast. So there are definitely similarities as well as a lot of differences.
Okay. So at least you feel like home, in meaning the home that you used to have carried over a little bit. Yeah.
I also, the last 10 years that I was in California, I was living in Sonoma County, which is a more rural part of the Bay Area, if that makes any sense. And so there were cattle grazing, or sometimes even sheep and fishermen, and there again, there's some similarities. It wasn't quite I didn't go straight from downtown San Francisco to the Westfjords.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And what was your profession in the United States when you were living there?
I was a university professor for 15 years. I study environmental history and policy and planning, and kind of a jack of all trades social scientist when it comes to environmental stuff. And before that, I actually worked for 4 years as an environmental planner in San Francisco. So I had some non-academic work experience before I got back into teaching and doing research.
Awesome. Great. So the leap from the US, first of all, what even inspired you? Did you come and visit Iceland and were just like, okay, this is a place where I see myself?
It's a little more complex story than maybe for some. I had always, I don't know why I was always sort of intrigued by Iceland. I seem to like the idea of going to cold places. I would love to visit Patagonia someday too, which is sort of the opposite direction. I don't know what that, maybe that's my personality, but, and in 2017, a bunch of life things sort of conspired to finally signing up for that trip. I do a lot of photography. I'm a really avid photographer since I was 8 years old. And a friend of mine leads photography trips in Iceland. And he usually was doing sort of classic ring road trips or blah, blah, blah. But in 2017, he sent out a note saying, this year we're going to do something different. We're going to stay in one place and just do little day trips out. And I hate having to pack up your suitcase every day. So I was like, oh, that sounds great. So I came here in 2017 in October on a photography trip. And it was just, as you know, I think a lot of people have this experience of just like instant, just total crush on this place and not really even understanding why. It just gets under your skin in a strange way. My last night, we went to Djupavik, which is in the eastern side of the Westfjords, if that makes any sense to anybody. Really remote again, and staying in this tiny hotel where our little group of photographers had the whole place. And our last night there, I literally was getting tears in my eyes because we had to leave, and I really didn't want to leave. I was just, and I'm not a huge world traveler. I've traveled a lot within the United States, not that much outside of it. But I never had that kind of experience before where it was just immediate. There's not so much that it was familiar, but just a real strong sense of, I need to know more about this. I need to experience more about this place. And so I came back the following year on exactly the same photography trip.
Wow. Okay.
Just signed up for it again. And okay, it worked out with my teaching schedule and everything. So, and that time I got to know the hotel proprietors at Djupavik a little bit, and we were chatting, and we became Facebook friends, and they were so welcoming and so kind that at Christmas time, I was like, I want to send them some little, gesture of, thanks for their kindness. And I had a book that had just come out in the US, which is really geeky, right? It's an academic book. It's about a national park area in California. It has nothing to do with anything relevant here. But I thought, well, I'll just send one. I didn't think they were going to read it. I thought they were going to put it on a shelf and say, oh, isn't that nice? Because it was really just about the gesture. But a couple months later, Ava wrote to me and she was like, Laura, I'm reading your book and I'm seeing all these parallels between the stuff you're talking about in these controversies between sort of sustainable agriculture and wilderness preservation in California. She was seeing some parallels between that and sort of, nature conservation issues here in Iceland. And so she gave me the idea to apply for a research grant, a Fulbright grant from the US government, to come do research here. I never would have thought there was, all of my specialty is in the Western US. I know nothing about anywhere else. I can tell you everything there is to know about California and Colorado and places in between, but, I'm not a European scholar. But it was Ava's seeing those similarities, those parallels that gave me the idea. So I did some research and I wrote up a proposal and was very surprised that it was funded. Like, oh, so that I got sabbatical from my university and was planning to come here. The grant was supposed to start in August of 2020, and as everyone knows, something happened that spring. When COVID hit, then all the Fulbright grants were just put on hold. They weren't really sure what was going to happen. Fulbright is this huge program that the US government funds to send scholars both out of the US into other countries and vice versa. And they've never missed a year in 75 years. So they were like, we really want to send our scholars, but they were like, we can't do it when it's unsafe for people to travel. So, and for whatever reason, that spring, I just was like, oh no, this was my chance and I'm going to miss it. And so I ended up sort of coming up with a way of just deciding, you know what, I already have sabbatical from my university. I already have leave. So I'm just going to go and hope that the grant gets funded. And if not, I'll just figure out what to do. But it seemed like, the right thing to do. I signed up for a language class here in the Westfjords, and that gave me permission, even during that summer of 2020, when tourists from the US were not allowed. I was able to get permission to travel in order to attend a course as a student. And then the Fulbright eventually did kick in January of 21. So, nice. So it's kind of this funny step way of getting myself here. But once I sort of saw the possibility, I was really determined.
Awesome.
And I thought I was coming for a year also. I didn't think I was coming to do it forever. I thought that's a temporary thing.
Very helpful to input, because I think, there are a lot of people who see images of Iceland, or if you've even visited, and they just want to make the full jump. But for you, it was more like, let me test the waters a little bit and see how this is.
I mean, I also, what little I knew about Icelandic immigration, I didn't think I could stay. I mean, you need a full-time job or a relationship that keeps you here, a spouse or a significant other, in order as a non-Schengen, non-EU citizen to be able to stay. And I didn't have that. So I thought that's why I was so determined to get myself here, even with all the COVID scariness and shutdowns and everything, because I really did think it was my only chance. This is never going to happen again. So to go and spend a year in Iceland, wow. So I'm going to go.
And I mean, as a student is another way that many people end up coming to Iceland, at least to live for some courses or a degree. So that was the route that you took for along with Fulbright, obviously. So there was more to it.
I was only signed up for a 3-week crash course. Which is the one, the short courses that are intensives held here in the Westfjords. And I think I met you when you were up
Yes, I was going to say, funny story is that's how we initially met for the first time, was the University Center of the Westfjords, right? Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Háskólasetra Iceland, Westfjords. So it was only a 3-week course, and I had signed up for it, I think, before the Fulbright had been canceled. And then I was like, I probably can't go. But then there was some regulation that changed that allowed students, even for short courses that didn't require full residency, allowed them to travel essentially as tourists. And so I was able to I had to write to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get a letter to give to Icelandair to say, yes, she's allowed in the country, let her pass. It was pretty intense. I arrived in late July in 2020. And, at that point, I think maybe was there one flight a week? I don't even remember.
I wasn't leaving, so I wasn't even checking, but yeah.
And it was a strange process to sort of go from, and I only got that letter from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I got it on a Monday, and my flight was on the coming Sunday. So in the meantime, I had rented out my house. I had put all my stuff in storage. I had, I was like, if I can't get myself there, I'll go stay with my sister in New York for a little while. It's like, I gotta do something.
Yeah. Okay. So you end up getting to Iceland. You're at the University Center, at least for those 3 weeks. And then eventually your Fulbright kicks in. What is happening during your year of living in Iceland that you go, okay, there's some feels going on, and maybe this is a place that I could see myself living for a long time?
It was a combination of sort of push and pull factors, as I think often happens when people sort of make big decisions. The sense of just being, in love with this landscape, this countryside, this society. It's not that everything's perfect, but it's really. I feel. I sometimes. I was telling a friend recently, I feel like the marble that's rolled to the very bottom of the bowl and has come to a stop. This is just, where I've spent a lot of my life kind of restless, and I don't feel restless here. So don't know what that's about. Pop psychology, go for it. But but also back in Sonoma County, I think the second or third week I was here or maybe it was a little later. Anyway, I think it was, in August of 2020, the first of 2 wildfires in Sonoma County that fall broke out, that if I had been home, I would have evacuated from. They were, within a 5-mile driving distance from my house.
Wow.
And that was following, I had to evacuate in 2017. I had to evacuate in 2019. So it would have been evacuations 3 and 4. And so I actually, at that point, was already pretty much deciding to sell my house. My house was way up on a high hill with a kind of like here. It had a very windy, narrow road that was rough. It was 20 minutes from the nearest fire station. It was incredibly fire prone. It had a big national park, a state park on the eastern side of the mountain, which is the direction the fires come from in fire season. So it was just, I had decided, okay, 4 evacuations in 3 years, that's too many. When I get home, I need to sell my house and, probably I thought I would buy a place in Petaluma or something, something else more in town. I had really enjoyed living kind of out in the countryside there, but the fire danger was just, I couldn't live with that kind of worry anymore every single year. So that was a kind of a factor. I had been toying with the idea of taking early retirement. My mother retired early, way back in the day in the early 90s, when she was 55. And so had kind of given me the whole conception that you could do that, it was allowed. And then in, I think, January of 21, my university was having a lot of enrollment and budget problems. And they were like, the only way a state university can drop its budget is to not have so many people on its payroll. So they were like, we need some people to take early retirement, please. So that is what sort of got me just thinking about it. And even though I was here for the whole year. I was renting a place in Bolungarvik, which is, the end of the road here in the Westfjords, the last town. It's about as far north as you can get in a town in Iceland, except for Grimsey. And I was just, even though it was kind of I don't feel like I sort of blended into the community. It was, peak COVID restrictions. There wasn't a lot of gatherings or social events that anybody could attend. So I was just kind of doing my own thing and going for walks and doing my research and mostly just kind of hanging out. But this place just still had a real hold on me. And so once I heard about this sort of early retirement request, I asked around and got the name of an immigration lawyer. In fact, it's Claudia, who you had interviewed. And so I think your interview came out just after I had gotten her name independently. So I was like, okay. So I talked with her and was just like, so is there any way I could stay if I did retire? Like, is there an avenue for this? And so we sort of talked things through, and she said, well, I don't really know if this will work. I can't guarantee anything, but you could try creating a company and then applying for residency based on hiring yourself. I do have, I have a PhD. I'm sort of, have expertise in certain things. And I would be applying to live in a remote part of the country instead of in Reykjavik. And so she thought that too would work in my favor, that immigration is like, we need more people in the Westfjords, especially people with skills and that, bring something to the table potentially. Yes. So we did that. I created a consulting company and filled out all the paperwork and waited a long time and eventually got the magical email from immigration saying that they had approved it. I could stay. Yay. So that's, they approved a work permit based on employing myself. They gave me a 2-year permit, which is, I guess, sort of unusual. Again, maybe just because I have an advanced degree and it's a sparsely populated area.
Please stay.
they've since renewed that once, and now
Nice.
I think sometime next spring I'll be eligible to apply for permanent residency.
Yes,
Um,
awesome,
so yeah.
exciting.
Oh, and I see one of my cats is trying to get in outside. Let me just let him
Okay.
in.
Mhm.
Hey, baby. Hi. What you doing? Are you both coming in? Yes. Come on. There we go. This is really my job, is that I am doorman to two very cute cats.
Yes, the actual people who rule
Yeah,
in the world, or animals.
overlords.
Yes. Mhm. Okay, great. And do you feel like you would have chosen another part of Iceland to live if the Westfjords hadn't been sort of crucial to your,
Nah.
being able to stay?
In spring of 21, my mom came to visit, and we did for the first she was here for a month, and the first 2 weeks we did a sort of a ring road trip. We drove counterclockwise. And that was my first time seeing any other part of the Westfjords
Oh,
besides
wow. Yeah. Okay.
Reykjavik and here. I had gone back and forth between the city and here a couple of times, but I had never seen any of the rest of the country. And so the whole time I was kind of like, so is this better? Like,
oh, yeah. You're like comparison.
and the local joke is, Westfjords are the best fjords. So I'm fully on board with that.
I love the Westfjords, and I think it's very magical. So I understand why you would end up living there. And yeah, and you also were able to eventually then purchase a home there, which is great. So like you have like you literally just your own space that allows for whatever it is that you want. And
the craziest part of the story was that I on the same day, I signed my retirement papers from Sonoma State electronically. I think the retirement actually kicked in a few weeks later, but I signed the papers. Like an hour later, I got an email from immigration saying, yes, we've approved your residence permit. And then that afternoon, I was looking at the real estate listings and I saw the listing for this house, which just looked ideal. And I was like, there's going to be something wrong with it. It's going to be terrible. Like, where somebody else with lots more money will swoop in and buy it before I have a chance. And anyway, I was like, that's crazy. Like, if you put that in a movie where all three things happen on the same day, people would be like, that's ridiculous. That never happened. So, more stars aligning.
Yeah, that's amazing. And there's a saying, it comes in threes. Usually they're talking about bad things, but I feel like this could be for good things too, clearly.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay.
Yep.
And what is it there's a lot of things obviously you like about living in Iceland, but I have to ask this question because then the opposite question comes next. So
Sure.
In terms of what do you like about living in Iceland?
I just, I like most things about living in Iceland. And I like the scale of it. I don't even live in a town, but the nearest town, I'm technically part of Thingari if you look at my address, and it's, about 150, 200 people. It's a very different scale than I've lived in for most of my life. Although when I was a kid, we spent summers my dad's a biologist. We spent summers at a biological field station in the Rockies, very high altitude, very remote, similar to here, no telephone, no television, no, very out in the natural world, but with sort of traces of human culture and history and so forth, which is what I study. A lot of things stem to that childhood experience. And I think being here reminds me a bit of that experience, of just, you get to know your neighbors. You chat with people at the swimming pool. There's just something very refreshing after sort of the anonymity of big urban areas for so much of my life, that I really appreciate here. In addition to it just being, a magnificent and always changing place. People are always like, oh my God, how do you deal with it's dark in the winter, it's light in the summer. And I'm like, yeah, well, it can be challenging sometimes, but I love that it's always changing. It's always, there's just a real vivaciousness, if that makes any sense, about the place itself. And it's far away from lots of trouble.
That's helpful. What about, so when it comes to winter, people are always asking me, like, what are your coping mechanisms? Do you feel like you had to adjust yourself in some
I
ways in
actually have
order?
a much harder time with summer. I don't
Oh,
know
with
if I'm
24
just a
hour
dark
daylight.
personality or
Yeah.
what, but during the winter, at least we still have a few hours of daylight and we get those
Hmm.
gorgeous long twilights that are cobalt blue and just so beautiful. And you get pastel colors with the indirect light. I just love it. I love snow, even though right now we have
Mm.
kind of an awful lot of it around, um, but summer is really hard for me because it doesn't get dark. Even if you have blackout curtains and so on, it's hard to sleep. And you don't see stars for 3 or 4 months.
Oh, wow.
And that is weird.
Yeah.
When I
Okay.
when I first went through my first full summer here, when August came and I saw my first star, I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I missed seeing those things."
That is such a different perspective on it that I haven't heard from anybody. So
Yeah,
that's
I'm
amazing.
backwards.
Yeah, but it's cool because that's, I mean, the spice of life is, variety in thoughts or preferences and things. So yeah, it's so funny because like I know personally summer is my favorite, but I also almost burn out in the summer because I want to do everything because there's daylight all
Right.
the time.
And
Whereas
I'm
like
sort of,
winter, it's like,
naturally
yeah,
slothful, so winter suits me.
yeah. You're like, I'll
Stay
just be at the
home,
window
knit some
drinking my
more.
tea. Yeah. And you're an
And also
avid knitter.
it's a funny coincidence. My birthday is the winter solstice, so the very
Oh
shortest day
wow. You're
has
like, it
always
fits me
been
perfectly.
well, it's always been special for me. Well, it
Yeah.
wasn't always. When I was a kid, I thought I had less birthday than everybody else, which was a drag.
Oh.
But now it's a special day, and so I think I'm just sort of uh, predestined to really like winter time.
Yeah.
But
And I,
winter storms are tough. That's one of the things I like
yeah.
the least, obviously, because I live in a timber house, so it really shakes when the wind
Oof.
hits.
Yeah.
Um, and this house is located in kind of it's a smart place. It's a little bit protected from the wind because it's kind of tucked into the hillside a little bit, but also means it gets a lot of snow.
Mm.
And there are occasionally times when all 3 doors are snowed shut and I have to crawl out a window and dig my way back in.
Wow.
So that's an adventure. My shoulder
Yes.
sometimes is not happy about living
Oh.
here, but that's okay.
Okay. For all those that are wondering, Westfjords, I would say, like in other parts of the north, the amount of snow you get is a lot more than usually in the south here. So like Reykjavik is, it's very rare there would be snowed in like that. Whereas there, it's more likely that it's to happen in the wintertime at some point. So yeah, that's another part of living in remote areas that can be fun, but also
Yeah.
challenging.
It can, there's a sort of a hollow crawl space under my house that isn't sealed off on the northeast side of the house. It's not
Mhm.
sealed off on any of the sides, but it means the wind can get underneath the house. So when it gets really cold, my kitchen drain has frozen, I think, 4 times now.
Oh.
Which is, we're trying to fix it. Plumbers hopefully on the way. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
problem I never had in California.
Yes, your daily adventures.
Yeah, there's always something to pay attention to.
Right. And you're an avid knitter. So I would
I've
assume
become an
too.
avid knit. I never knit before I
Oh,
came here.
oh.
I actually
What?
learned in that crash course, one of the evenings they were like, lots of Icelandic people knit, so we're going to teach you how to knit. And I was like, okay. And again, you had influence on this without knowing it because you had interviewed Helene Magnuson,
Mhm.
and I saw that interview sometime, right after I had it was clunkily trying to make a really pathetic looking scarf. And so I was like, oh, look, she's an Icelandic designer and she does stuff with
Yeah.
Icelandic wool. And then she had a new pattern coming out and did a video supported knit along that first winter I
Oh.
was here. And so I was like, ooh, she's got videos that show you how to do everything. So I'll just follow
Yeah.
along. So I made 2 pathetic scarves. And then my third project ever was an Icelandic patterned cardigan that you had to cut open and
Wow.
knit with unspun wool that everybody's afraid of, and it was just like this ordinarily not somebody's beginner project, but because it was supported I was like, okay, I'll just do this, and what's the worst thing that could happen?
Right.
And then I was hooked. Now I knit all the
Yeah.
time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
First of all, I've seen some of your photos of your projects on Facebook, and I would have never assumed that you only started knitting when you came to Iceland. I was
Oh,
like,
that's
this looks fantastic. So
three
you're doing
years,
great.
but they've been intense 3 years.
Probably a
I'm
lot of like
committed.
cursing of being like, oh, I can't believe this. I'm glad you're sticking with it and hopefully
Yeah.
enjoying it as well.
Oh, I love it. I don't know why. Again, sort of like, why is this such an enjoy? This used to be a work task for people that they had to knit things,
Yeah.
but I enjoy it. It's like knitting,
Yeah.
like working with little kittens and fluffy clouds. Awesome.
And you already talked a little bit about some things that you don't like, but are there other specific things about Iceland that are not your favorite?
Um, big winter storms are the main one. uh, I grew up with earthquakes. We don't have earthquakes up here in the Westfjords. They're all down south. And I can't tell you how many text messages I got when, the first sort of all the various what's the word?
Eruptions.
Eruptions. Thank you.
Yeah.
I am of an age where words just vanish every now and then.
Happens to me too, so don't worry.
It's reassuring. No, I would get all these, really sweet, well-meaning text messages from former colleagues or Facebook friends who were like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "That's 400 kilometers away. It's fine." But I did, because I'm from coastal Northern California, I grew up with earthquakes. I know sort of how to roll with those, but I didn't grow up with extreme wind. And so, big windstorms when it's, the equivalent of 90 miles an hour out there. And I'm just like, is my roof going to hold? That makes me nervous. I think in part because also of the wildfire evacuations that I went through before I left California. It just suddenly home seemed much more damageable than it ever had before. And now I just, in bad storms, that's where your mind goes. Like, oh my God, what do I do if something, and you do, one of the hardest things here has been, figuring out who to call when you have some problem. There's no yellow pages where you can just look at where are all the plumbers. I'm really fortunate. I have amazingly fabulous neighbors. Shout out to Jon and Elsa Maria on that side, and Valdi and Edda on that side, and my friend Aroni down the way at Alvidra. They've been so supportive and, very tolerant of this sort of random US American citizen plopping down and kind of going, so how do I get this fixed?
Show me the ropes.
Help.
Yeah.
They are always there to come to my rescue, which is very kind, although I try not to lean on them too hard. But I think that's one of the things that actually is one of my, I've been trying to learn very slowly to speak Icelandic a little bit. And I have two main motivations. One is simply to be able to speak to my neighbors better in their language, even though mostly they know some at least, if not lots of English, but it seems rude not to learn their language. But also to be able to navigate things like, I need a carpenter. How do I find one? I need to get a doctor's appointment. How do I navigate this health system website that's in another language? So I think that sort of sense of needing to work a lot harder to figure out pretty basic things that that is a challenge, but it's not a reason to not like living here. So
yeah, for sure.
It's just, you got to roll with it.
Is yao.is not helpful up there in terms of a directory?
Oh, I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, if you ever try ja.is, it's Iceland's yellow pages in essence.
Okay, I did not know about that.
Yeah, so it's very possible.
I'm relying on Facebook and neighbors,
which Facebook is huge here, so I totally understand that. But you can potentially use that directory to also find services, at least in the Reykjavik area. I'm pretty sure it's for everywhere.
Cool.
But
I don't know how it is that I've been here for 3.5 years and I did not know that. But
well, because your neighbors probably already know everybody in the area, so it's like they are sort of, their mind is the yellow pages, but also technically Yao.is is supposed to be the director.
Cool.
So yeah. The US,
The
when it
US.
comes to missing
Strangely.
anything. Yeah, there's a whole lot of feelings there for sure. But do you miss anything about the US?
Uh, um, in all honesty, not very much.
Mhm.
Someone was asking me recently, I think on Facebook, like, so, I think in the midst of, we had some pretty intense storms around Easter here. And someone was like, so are you thinking a lot about Northern California right now? And I was like, no.
There's a lot of things I can think about Northern California for, but not for that.
Yeah, no, it wasn't, I don't know if I've made that switch in my mind and I'm here, but
Mhm.
I lived in Sonoma County, which is one of those places with, blessed with an insane growing season, and you can grow almost
Mhm.
anything. So there was a all organic, small scale, family friendly community farm on my drive home from campus back to
Wow.
my house that I could stop at and get my little CSA bucks every week of fresh
Nice.
grown vegetables that are seasonal and, you know, just, cut flowers that are all beautiful every week. And, I miss those little delights. The fact that I lived in the middle of one of the best wine countries in the
Mhm.
world was, I miss that sometimes when I'm in Vinbooth looking at the shelves and going, oh my God, what is this stuff? Um, but at the same time, I kind of like that it's not the same. I'm
Mhm.
not one of those people that's like, oh my God, there's saltines for sale at the store. I'm going to go get my little bite of the US. I'm just like,
Yeah.
things are
You
different. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I had a similar feeling, and I do still. I very much love Iceland, don't plan on leaving at all. If
Mhm.
I, obviously things in life can change, but
Yeah.
that's how I see myself for the foreseeable future. And yeah, for a long time too. It was mostly food though. Like you mentioned, different fresh vegetables or fruits and stuff that just don't get imported here. And
I
yeah,
miss
having
taquerias.
access.
I'm not gonna be I'm not gonna, you know, being spoiled of having lived in San Francisco for years and being able to, walk a couple of blocks and get an amazingly delicious burrito and then take it to my favorite bar and get a glass
Mhm.
of wine and sit there and, you know, I miss
Yeah.
that, those little creature comforts. But then,
Mhm.
you go back home to visit or something and I'll get a burrito. So that'll be
Yeah.
okay.
Have you been back to California, to your old
I
stomping
have
grounds?
not actually. My mother is like tapping her fingers, kind of going, "When are you coming?"
Aw.
um, I think for the longest time, this is going to sound really childish, perhaps, but for the longest time, I had this weird kind of oh, what's the word? Superstition that coming here was almost like coming to Narnia, sort of accident
Mm.
through the wardrobe door and, finding yourself in this snowy landscape. And it almost felt like tempting fate to leave. Like,
Ooh, okay.
there's sort of this weird, totally irrational fear that if I left, I wouldn't be able to get back for some reason.
Wow.
Which of course was, like I said, totally irrational and not a big deal. And I think I finally left Iceland for the first time to go attend a meeting for an organization I'm on the board of in London last year, just about a year ago in May. Um, which I had never been to London. The plane ticket was paid for. I was like, okay, this will persuade me to finally go. And then my father had some health issues this fall, and I had to go back in a hurry. But he and my stepmother live in South Carolina, so I didn't make
Okay.
it all the way back to California. And I spent Christmas at my sister's in New York, and I'm going to go
Okay.
back. Actually, just in a couple weeks, my nephew is graduating from NYU, so
Oh,
I'll be in the
congratulations.
city. Woohoo!
Yay.
But then I'll come right back. Eventually, I'll make
Yeah.
it to California. It's
You're
just
like
a
turning right
long
back
flight
around.
back to California, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, that's
when I
exciting.
go, I have like 8 million people I have to visit, so it's going to have to be
Mhm.
longer.
You probably need to stay for a while just to give yourself a rest.
Yeah, although I have two pet cats here, and
Right. Yeah.
it. especially in winter, if I leave the house, even if the cats went and lived somewhere else, if you leave the house empty, the drains freeze. So, again, maybe I'm being a little irrational, but I tend to not want to leave for that long unless I could get someone to come and stay here, which I've done. The few times I have traveled either within Iceland or elsewhere, I've had some wonderful house sitters and cat sitters who come and look after the boys. But yeah, long. And while I'm trying to work toward permanent residency, it's still a pretty big limit, but you're limited in how much time you can spend outside the country.
Yes.
So I'm kind of, because my parents are elderly, I'm kind of, reserving that as much as I can in case I do need to go and stay with someone for a while or something, just to try and give myself as much wiggle room until I can hopefully get past that milestone.
Exactly. And at the moment, with the current permit that you have, it's 3 months, right? You can't be out of
90 days, I think.
Yeah, in a year.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then with permanent residence, it's like 3 months and 4 years, or something like 4 months and
I don't even know what it is, but it's better.
Yes, there's a restriction, but it isn't exactly as much, and so that's good. And when it comes to your consulting business, do you consult like as a teacher, like what? Because I know some people are going to be asking, like, what exactly does she do? Because they are gonna, for themselves, try to understand how this fits in with their own types of professions.
Yeah. Basically, it's that because Icelandic labor law is very strong, and everybody is required to belong to a union, and there are the union actually has to approve my residency, my work permit requests when they go through, in addition to immigration. And then there's a set scale you have to pay yourself at, and so on. So I think we applied for me to I'm officially employed 75% time, which is just what I was given advice to do, basically. That if it was less than 50%, they definitely would not approve it. And it was questionable as to whether they'd approve it if it was between 50 and 75. So, and because I have a PhD, I do have to pay myself at a pretty high level. But it's so strange. It's like, okay, I'm self-financing. So money comes out of my personal account, goes into the business account. I pay myself a salary and pay wage, payroll taxes on that. And then the money's mine again, and I pay income taxes on that. So it's kind of an expensive way to get residency, but it was the only way for me. And then in terms of, any work that I do for someone, they basically contract with my company. So I get my salary every month, whether I have income coming in or not. And then, all my teaching is contracted through that. All of I work as a writing support person for the graduate students at the University Center of Westfjords. They have two graduate programs in coastal and marine management and rural communities and development. So those students, a lot of them are coming from other countries. English is often not their first language. So just some help with not the content of their thesis, but the grammatical structure and sort of flow of writing a big project like that. And then, if there was someone who wanted some consulting on local planning projects or environmental issues, I have a lot of expertise around national parks. And so there's been a lot of conversation about that in Iceland in recent years. Again, another reason to get my language skills up higher so that I could potentially participate more in some of those meetings and so on. But all that's the kind of stuff that I could do similar to working as an environmental contractor back in the US in that sense. Not doing sort of, holes in the ground and, I don't do pollution control or any of that kind of stuff. I'm more land management and nature protection and so on. But that's the kind of stuff I do.
Great. When it comes to living in Iceland, obviously you see yourself there long term. Do you ever see yourself wanting to move back to the United States?
I feel like the pandemic experience taught us many things, but one of them, for me at least, was to not really make a lot of really long-term plans, because you just,
Mm.
we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to feel in. I remember when I first got here, and I was like, I love the snow, I love winter, and
Mhm.
someone was like, you're going to hate it 5 years from now. Who knows? I'm not there
Yeah.
yet. So I try not to. It's, and as I get older, I live alone now. Maybe that'll change. Maybe it won't. I don't know. Um, it's just, living, if I do stay as sort of a solo cat human, cat overlords, um, at some point living by yourself in the countryside where there's a lot of physical stuff you need to do, maybe not so practical. So it's too hard for me to know at this point.
Mhm.
Um, I keep myself open. I did, like you said, I bought a house here, and I had, all my stuff in California was in storage anyway, because I had rented out my house. So I just had them put in a big container and send it on over. Uh, so I'm here for now. That's pretty much the best I can do.
Yeah, definitely. How was that experience sending things over? Was that relatively easy, or was it a lot
Um,
more
it was
challenging?
surprisingly easy. It was very expensive. Um, but I'm glad I did it. I hate the sort of um, tendency in the US of everybody to have a storage space,
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
rented weird little storage space on the outskirts of town, and just stuff piles up endlessly and
Mhm, mhm.
space. And I just really didn't want that to happen. And I missed, having some of my things. Um, I had my grandmother's dishes here, and, just some
Mhm.
little odds and ends, lots of pictures. And um, there's something, there was a small part of me that wanted to just kind of keep the simplification of having arrived here with 2 suitcases in 2020, and, acquired a few things here from the secondhand store, but I didn't have that much stuff. And there was kind of a freshness with that. Um, but I also, when I was 9 years old, my dad's parents retired from their jobs in Washington, D.C., and they moved to California and built a unit onto our house and lived with us. So
Mm.
I grew up with my grandparents. And when that happened, um, their parents had both either passed away or just gone into a nursing home. So they were basically, and my dad's an only child. So there were four
Oh.
households worth, or 3 or 4 households worth of stuff that got
Mhm.
sent to California and went in mostly into storage.
Wow.
And when my grandmother passed away in 2008, there we were getting stuff out of storage that had been stored since 1975. So
Wow.
that was part of, I was like, oh my God, she's been paying storage fees for 35 years.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Regarding your kitties, your cats, did
Kitty
you
cats, where are they? They went upstairs. They're sleeping.
did you bring them with you, or did you acquire cats in Iceland?
I acquired cats in Iceland. I would have, I had cats back in California, and they were formerly feral cats. The people that
Mhm.
rented my house just kept looking after them. But they had never lived anywhere but the weird rural area that they lived in there. And they were terrified of going to the vet, going in a car.
Yeah.
Like, the trauma of trying to bring them here would have just sent them over the edge, especially if I wasn't staying, which originally I thought I
Right.
was. So they stayed in California, and eventually the woman that bought my house adopted them. So they got
Okay.
to stay in their home, and that's a good
Yay.
thing. Um, but I really missed cats. I've had a cat since I was 8, and I was sad without a cat. And a
Yeah.
friend of mine volunteers for Villiketter, the
Mhm.
local, national cat, sort of a rescue organization. And she said, "Hey, there's someone they've caught a feral cat who lives in Isafjordur, who is living in a parking lot, and she's pregnant, so she's gonna be having kittens." And
Yay.
I think actually they caught her after the kittens were born, but they knew, they were sort of keeping an eye on her.
Yeah.
Uh, the funny thing is, she was this very elegant, kind of long and elegant cat, and so the people that were feeding her in the parking lot had started calling her the queen, because she was so
Ooh.
elegant. And so they named all the kittens. There were 6 of them, and they named them all after British royalty. They're Icelandic cats. They're just regular old cats, but
Right, yeah.
They're from Iceland, but they have British names. Or at least they started with British names. They were George and William originally.
Oh
I've
my
already had a
God.
cat named William, and
Mhm.
my dad's grandfather's names were George and Julian. So William
Oh,
became Julian. And
okay.
they are now becoming internet famous on Instagram because they like to go for walks on the beach. There's a little,
Ooh,
it's rare. There's a sand beach right across the road from my house, which are
yeah.
unusual in this part of the world. And the cats like to go and dig in the sand and chase things. And so
Where
I take
could we
photos of them, and people are like, "Oh my God, your cats are like putting their paws in water. How weird is that?"
where can we follow them on?
Oh, on Instagram, it's just my account. They don't have their
Okay.
own account, but I am LAWATT everywhere. So Instagram, Facebook, and Flickr. I'm old school with photos.
Okay. So LA Watt.
Yeah, it's my first 2 initials of my last name,
Okay.
LAWATT.
On Instagram and everywhere else, but I'll at least put it on
Yep.
Instagram.
Yeah,
I'll have that here in the bottom if people want to.
I do.
So,
If you like to see pictures of the Westfjords, I take a lot of them. There's
yeah.
I don't think there's ever a day that there isn't something.
That's amazing. And well, yeah, I mean, you're right about cats. Because I had a cat in New York who I loved as well. Oh my gosh, it was so hard to not take him. But again, he was also afraid of his own shadow at times. So it would have been so sad. But the cats here are so used to being outside. Like they have a totally different life, just like the kids in versus like the US and many places in the US. They're just like able to run free because it's so much safer for them.
Exactly. Especially because I don't live in town. There's no other cats around even. So
So
they
they
have
really
to,
have full reign.
they seem to have an understanding with the Arctic foxes. They don't mess with them, and foxes don't mess with us. They do like to chase birds, which I try to discourage, but they also catch mice, which I encourage. And they just, they've got a pretty darn good life here. They go in, they go out, they go in, they go out. I open the door, close the door.
Awesome. Okay, when it comes to your Icelandic, because you've already talked about it a bit, and this is something that you would like to get better at. How has that journey been for you? Like, just talk about maybe some of the courses that you've taken, the practicing.
Oh my God,
I know, but
it's funny because I am not a natural language learner. And I guess I was a natural language learner with English. I'm actually a very good writer and very good editor. I know the language pretty darn well. But I took French in high school, and can I speak any French? No. Although sometimes when I'm struggling with Icelandic, weird French that I didn't know I knew starts coming out of my mouth from the depths of the beyond. So I'm a really slow language learner, which is frustrating because I'm also used to being someone who can articulate well, because I'm used to giving university lectures or writing essays or whatever. And so to be sort of stuck with very simple sentences at best is it's just a frustrating place to be. I took a few of the sort of short format crash courses or 1 or 2 week long courses. I took several in my first year and a half here, and instantly I forgot everything. Just I could say and I could say basic hello, but really anything, I could not construct a sentence. I used the Drops app to learn some vocabulary, so I could point at things and say, glass. Same as English. But the actual grammar, the way to use verbs or to put a sentence together to actually express a thought, could not do it all. And then this year, the University of Iceland has started I think last year they did a pilot program of this, and this year they did their first full year of what they call a practical diploma in Icelandic as a second language, which they were offering either in person or online. And I think a huge slew of people that had, a lot of my classmates have been in Iceland for 7 or 10 years. They often have spouses that work here, and they just never had, because they're living in the hinterlands, they didn't have an opportunity to take a long form program in learning the language. So I just had my last class meeting last Thursday.
Ooh,
I still have final exams to go.
Okay. Knock on wood, it will be great.
I still feel, I feel perpetually behind. I still can't speak nearly as well as I had hoped to be able to. But I do occasionally look back at my notebook and I'm like, oh, yeah, I actually have learned something. Every now and then. I can understand the language better than I can speak. I can read a little. And I'm thinking about possibly continuing with, they have a BA program in Icelandic second language.
Much more intense.
I think they're going to start offering more courses online. Because I don't live in Reykjavik, it's been challenging to figure out how to do that. But if they, I'd like to not forget everything I've learned, which I have the feeling the minute I stop taking this program has been intense. It's been an hour and a half long class every afternoon, all week long for 9 months.
Yeah, 9 months. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was all last fall term, and then what they were calling spring term, but we all know it's winter. I'm like, spring? What is this spring you speak of? So it's been a big commitment of time, and I definitely feel like I've gotten better, but there's a long road to hoe there still. So
yeah. And do you feel like this was a good investment of your time in terms of learning?
Yeah, definitely. Again, it feels, Iceland is such a funny country because you can get by for decades without knowing hardly any Icelandic, because so many people, between their compulsory school Icelandic English that they have to learn, and then from entertainment, from TV and movies, their English is fantastic usually. So you can get by, but that just seems, if you're really going to live here and be part of the community and part of the culture, it seems rude isn't quite the right word, but just presumptuous maybe to not at least try. And I find that, people are so excited that you even can say the simplest thing. I go swimming. I swim laps at the pool in Thingri, and our pool was closed for about 3 months this winter because it had a leak and they had to fix it, and it took forever. But once it finally opened up, it was really cool because I went back and, my friend Lala was like, "You're back!" I was like, "Go the dying!" And someone else in the swimming pool was like, "Hooray!" So they, I felt very welcomed, in part because I think I have made an effort to, at least stammer now and then in Icelandic, and to try. I think they appreciate that. So
absolutely, and that's great to hear. When it comes to advice for other people who want to move to Iceland, whether they're, obviously US perspective is what we both have, but there could be, I think, advice for anybody. Feel free to.
Obviously, check immigration law. Make sure
always number one.
Because it is, especially if you aren't from the Schengen region of Europe, it's a challenge. So that is definitely a thing. But more, I think, just, we are all kind of taken in by the gorgeousness of this place and the relative apparent sort of naturalness of it. I'm a university professor. Don't get me started about naturalness. It's not as natural as it looks, but that's okay. We like that, nature and culture together. But we all get kind of swayed by the beauty and the magnificence, but it can be a hard place to live. The seasons change fast, and certainly people that do have seasonal depression or any other kinds of issues with that are going to have a tough time. I know a friend of mine back in Seattle already has a tough time in Seattle with the winters. And I'm like, he's never even going to come visit here. He's like, no, it's too dark. but also the realities of living in small communities. I mean, obviously, a lot of people who come to this country live in Reykjavik, and I think that, one other thing I'd say is, if your job or your circumstances allow, think about not living in the city, because Reykjavik is not Iceland. There's so much more. It's a small country, but it's a big island. There's a lot here, and there's a lot of variety in that. So so maybe people will find their place in one of the other communities outside of the city, and not have to deal with crazy housing prices there. I think just being realistic about what life is like, as opposed to just the postcard view of Iceland.
Right. Totally. Yeah. Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And before we end off, I have one question that I ask all of my guests. And that is, what is your favorite Icelandic word or phrase?
I prepared for this one. Of course, I knew the question in advance. And it actually is a phrase. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, because I wrote it down because I couldn't remember. It's glöggt gests augað. I believe translates more or less to clear is the guest's eye. And when I first came here to do, I had a research grant to do historical research on the Strandir coast in the east side of the Westfjords, to think about, the changing relationships of that place with people that live there over time. And, I very quickly ran into the problem that I didn't have a lot of Icelandic skills. And if you're going to do actual historical research, you need to be able to read primary documents, which are all
minor details.
So I ended up, the project didn't quite go as I had planned. I ended up reading a lot of other people's research about Iceland, but didn't do a lot of original research myself. And that made me feel very self-conscious about even talking about or trying to write about it. And I can't tell you how many Icelanders have quoted that old saying to me, because I think they have a genuine, not all, but many Icelanders have a real curiosity about how things that they take for granted can be seen by someone who's new, who has a fresh take on this place, and they're interested in what that fresh take might be. So I have really, that phrase has helped me to feel okay with staying here, and with trying to make my place here, and with starting to try and write, maybe write a book about my experiences here, because they have that openness and that curiosity about what the outsider sees, not just the inside view.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's beautiful that there are many Icelanders who are curious, who watch All Things Iceland too, right? I'm sure that with you,
how could they not? It's so fabulous.
Which always in the beginning used to make me think like, what? But again, it's like they're curious about what other people think about them, and perspective. So it's greatly appreciated, especially the supportive ones. So,
always good.
All right. Well, it has been an amazing time getting your story. There's so much more of your story that's unfolding, of course, but at least up until this point, I appreciate you sharing it with my audience. And for sure, you're on LA Watts, you said, on Instagram, on Facebook. I'm sure
I think pretty much all social media. I've been, either OG enough or lucky enough to be able to have the same username almost everywhere.
Yes.
If you look for me on Ravelry for knitting, I'm LA Watt there as well.
Nice. Look at you getting all the good, making sure you've got it everywhere.
All the medias.
Awesome. Well, I hope the snow melts relatively soon in terms of impeding your ability to leave your home.
I can safely get out of my house at this point. There's a lot of snow on the porch still, but I'm just going to let it melt.
Laura, it's been lovely chatting with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who's been listening, and for those who watched this episode on YouTube. Of course, subscribe if you want more awesome content like this and more interviews.
I'm a subscriber.
Yes. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Take care.